You ever build something new, put it out into the world, and then wonder if everyone who doubted you was actually right? This episode isn't about, startup metrics or pitch decks. It's about the stuff that you wrestle with quietly. It's the fear that you're not qualified. It's the urge to wait until it's perfect. It's the question that lingers, even after you've made progress. Am I doing this right or am I just doing this? If you've ever launched something and uh, felt like the biggest risk wasn't the market accepting what you're doing, but it was your own self belief that stood in your way, this episode is for you. This started this last episode that I did, this first solo episode, if you will, was really just me trying to kind of bring this build in public methodology to the work that we're doing here. And honestly, I think I even acknowledged it was perhaps just me, talking into the ether and kind of self therapy. And you guys were just on a journey with me to kind of do that. And so, the first time it was talking about mayhem versus momentum in an early phase. It was talking about how you can't build new systems with old thinking, or the idea that founders aren't always, the successful founders aren't always the loudest founders. And then this idea that the most underrated innovation tool is often empathy. And these are all things that I think are how you perceive external factors and how you perceive the signals that you see and feel in the marketplace. I got a lot of really good feedback about that episode. It was honestly quite surprising for me to get that feedback and to hear those perspectives. And the feedback was, appreciation for sharing a personal story, that we don't often see this for people who are building things. We often just assume that everything is going well, everything is going right. And there was, many of these same struggles, whether they're specific to the instance or just more general to the people who are doing work like this and building new things. That it was valuable to hear some of those things. So it got me thinking. It got me wondering, why don't we do more of this? Why don't we? What happens if we do more of this? What happens to the collective? We talk about mental health. We talk about lonely journeys as entrepreneurs. We talk about all those things, but we don't talk about the specifics, or we don't break those into manageable pieces. And so it kind of led me down this path of, maybe the next conversation, maybe the next opportunity to talk about these things was to talk about the internal aspects, the hidden work behind building new things, but less about, the hardest part being the pitch decks, the funding, the building a new idea and actually executing it in the world. But it's what do those things, what do those hardships cause internally for us? The hardest part might actually be dealing with the quiet questions that come up in our heads. And so this episode isn't about product market fit. This episode is really about maybe emotional market fit. How do you validate yourself in these situations? How do you deal with those internal struggles and those, the validation of you as a founder, or you as a builder, or you as someone who's trying to do something new versus validating the idea or the business? I think the first thing that I think of, as I started to kind of journal and write about this feeling I have, is this thing that we hear, this phrase that we often talk about called FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I remember the first time I heard that, the first time I heard that phrase, the first time somebody had said, oftentimes what holds people back is FUD. And I thought, that's other people, that's not me. In the situation and with the context in which it came up, it wasn't about me. It was about understanding what might hold other people back from accepting certain things, or maybe what holds team members back from, trying new things or doing work that they haven't done before. And it was always me thinking about it in the context of other people and not thinking about it in the context of myself. Um, then I very recently was reflecting on a personal story and kind of personal element of kind of this journey that I was on, and I was reflecting back on 2019. We had just wrapped up some governance strategy work. I think I've talked about this in the past. We had just finished a body of work where we engaged the community, and we were kind of moving forward with implementing some of these things. And there was still like this resistance. I could still feel kind of the pushback on a lot of this work that we were doing, and couldn't put my finger on what was really happening. And it created a lot of uncertainty and a lot of doubt in my head. And years later, a couple of years ago, I got feedback from a civic leader that sat down with me and said, it was funny in 2019. There were a lot of people who didn't believe that what you were doing could be done in Kansas City. There were a lot of people who didn't believe that what you could be done in this area. There were a lot of people who didn't believe what you were doing could be done, with economic mobility and with, in an inclusive way and in a way that was, welcoming and brought in all elements of the community that would be required to make it work. And there were a lot of people who didn't believe you could do it. And that hit me, and it was like they were being, there were a lot of people who kept encouraging you to do it or not saying no because they were being polite. And, that really got me thinking about, it hit me. It kind of struck me as feedback I didn't expect. And it kind of re-emphasized or validated those feelings I was having in 2019 about the work I was doing. But as I started to reposition that feeling, as I started to reposition how I was internalizing that fear, uncertainty, and doubt about the work I was doing, I started to realize that FUD doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it just means you're early, right? If there are things that you're doing that haven't been done, of course, people are going to react in some of those ways, or of course, some of that feedback is what you're going to get and what you're going to receive. Let's just be honest. If everyone already understood it, if everyone already knew what it meant, it would already have been done. So anytime that you're a founder, anytime that you're an inventor, anytime that you're doing innovation work at any level, that idea that it's that idea that that uncertainty that you have, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong. It just means that you're early and there's a lack of understanding. So sometimes the silence, the questions, even the raised eyebrows, the skepticism that you might feel, and how those things get internalized into your feelings and create some of the these elements of FUD that might hold you back from doing the things that you want to do. Sometimes those things are just simply signals that you're early, simply that you're in a territory that most people don't understand, and that's just the validation that what you're doing hasn't been done. It doesn't necessarily mean it's something that it needs to hold you back from continuing to do it. But that, thinking about that, I was like, all right, cool. What do you do about that? How do you take that feeling? How do you take that perspective or those elements of FUD? How do you then, how does that get internalized? And I think there's another phrase that you hear a lot, and there's another thing I think that happens for a lot of people, and there's this idea of imposter syndrome. And this feeling that you specifically might not be qualified to do something. And so, look, there are other examples, there are other things that I've talked about where I've had that imposter syndrome. And I'll use another example relative to this project specifically. When we started this in 2019, we had a lot of conversations about this not being about real estate. that this was about programming and placemaking. That was the feedback that I heard nationally. Those were the things that I was really trying to reinforce as an initiative. And then I would sit in a lot of rooms where real estate was the conversation, and there was terminology, there was specific elements of how real estate worked. There were, specific, there was language that was used. There were things that made me feel like I didn't belong in the room because I was not educated on how real estate development, commercial real estate development, how some of those things worked. And so for me, I used to sit there and say, and I would say these in introductions, I would say these in conversations, I'm not a real estate person. And it was kind of my way of addressing the imposter syndrome and kind of giving myself an out in a lot of conversations as I'm not an expert. And over time, I started to realize that the only way through that feeling was to actually keep showing up and actually to maybe be more immersive about my experience, or be more immersive in terms of diving into the area that I didn't understand, diving into the area that I didn't have a keen appreciation of, or wasn't as well educated about, or didn't feel comfortable in the conversation. And I think oftentimes founders tend to retreat from work that doesn't affirm their belief in who they are. And if you're a creator, if you're somebody doing something new, sometimes the work is the thing that can redefine you and redefine how you are perceived or how you feel about yourself. So instead of avoiding the thing that we feel doesn't affirm that identity, it's that work that really kind of helps build that up. And so, this idea of, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, creating imposter syndrome, and that's how we manifest things internally. And that's how we move forward or don't, because we let those things keep us back. Maybe it's not, imposter syndrome isn't an alarm. Maybe it's a compass, right? Maybe it's something that helps us show us the direction of where we need to dig in and dive in and immerse, and recognize that that's the next challenge for us to become the experts in doing this new thing. And so when I realized I wasn't as well versed, I had an amazing opportunity that had been presented to me to host a weekly webinar for the Urban Land Institute here in Kansas City during the pandemic. It was a weekly virtual lunchtime webinar. I took something that I felt comfortable doing, which is doing research for interviews, learning to be curious and ask questions about things I didn't know as a form of engagement. And so I took each one of those 22 episodes over that 22-week period or 25-week period to basically immerse myself in a topic, doing the research for a specific interview, learning from the individual who I was interviewing, their perspectives, and then using that as a catalyst to identify those areas where I still needed more education and still needed to learn more about a specific topic. Whether it was infill development, incremental development, whether it was real estate finance, whether it was public spaces and the use of public spaces, and some of the interviews we did there, affordable housing and the challenges and the nuances and complexities of, doing some of these real estate elements, and how some of these things were more impactful to the community. I didn't know much about any of that stuff. But it was a great opportunity for me to take a skill I did have and use that as a tool to learn more about it. So again, taking that imposter syndrome less as a signal to stay away and more as a compass to say, this is an area you should circle and move forward with. Which I think kind of brings me, not I think, it does, it brings me to the third point that I've been thinking about. I work a lot with early stage founders, and we talk a lot about market validation. And we talk about how we validate a product, how we validate a business idea, how you create a prototype or a version that you can put in front of potential customers, and you can interview prospects and you can get feedback and iterate on and do some of those types of things. Well, why don't we use that same methodology? Why don't we use that same mentality to validate ourselves? Why don't we figure out how to identify those things and test and iterate in those things with ourselves. So I think if you applied that same kind of lean startup methodology to fear and those internal fears and feelings that you're having, I mean, we run these experiments, we run these tests on our products and our ideas. Why don't we run them on ourselves? Why don't we identify those things? What would it look like if we did that, right? What would it look like if we were to actually test our own fears or validate our own internal assumptions versus our product assumptions or our business assumptions? What would it look like if you launched your idea publicly, not to see if it worked, but to see if the public would meet you halfway? Show the draft, show the work, put it out there. You know, I've been a big fan, and I think a lot of people have said to me that, you know, you manifest things. You say things that aren't real yet, and it causes some people to doubt. But at the same time, for me, it's an opportunity to maybe, and maybe I haven't used it this way and specifically identified this way, but it's an opportunity for me to validate my own feelings about it. And it's a way for me to validate and test those fears and assumptions I have about what I'm doing. So treat that emotional risk like you treat a user test. And why don't we take that mentality, and why don't we do those things just like we would do on the business side? So I think the last thing then that led me down the path of thinking about was with fear, uncertainty, and doubt, with imposter syndrome being the internal manifestation, and how can we test some of those assumptions? How can we build out some of those elements and kind of move those things forward? Why isn't grace something that we use as a way to exhibit competitive advantage, or as a way to, you know, differentiate the strengths that we bring to something, or the way we're developing something? When you're building something unproven, when you're building something new, you know, grace matters. And oftentimes I think we think of offering grace or allowance for variance, or allowance for learning, or for not understanding. We do that oftentimes for our customers and for our partners and for our investors, and as founders or as people who are building things, we tend to allow grace on the outside, but why aren't we using that as an opportunity on the inside? Why aren't we offering grace to ourselves in those situations? So when you think about startup culture, and you think about founder culture in particular, we celebrate the grit, we celebrate the resilience. I do this, and I think it's an important element of what makes entrepreneurs successful, is to demonstrate those things, the push, the willingness to do the hard things. But grace, especially in its early stages, the lonely stages of entrepreneurship, is part of that startup stack as well. Like, it should be right there with resilience and grit and some of those other things. Grace should absolutely be one of those things that we're doing. So we absolutely need to do that. We should celebrate the founders that keep pushing, and you know, and celebrate the ones who let go of what no longer fits as well. And I think that can become a competitive advantage. I think that can become something that is advantageous for us as we're dealing with some of these internal feelings and some of these pressures that you feel as a founder, as a tool. And so I think there's one question I would leave everyone with this week as we go through kind of talking about the internalization of these external factors, or how we think about ourselves as when we're doing new things that haven't been done, and how you can validate those things. I think the question that I would leave everyone with is, you know, are they right? Maybe, but what if they're not? Name the fear. that you have. Run a test. Let the results and not the assumptions you fill in the gaps with and those internalizations, let the results of that test define you and define it, not the wild machinations we do in our own heads and the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that certain unknowns create for ourselves. So, what fear are you still carrying? And what would it take for you to test it and not bury it? That's what I'm trying to do. You know, these are another one of these lessons that I'm still learning as I move through this, and how you deal with those internalizations. I think this is just another opportunity for us to all reflect on, you know, how are we handling that fear? How are we handling that uncertainty? How are we handling that doubt? The hidden elements that are there when you're doing something new. I hope these conversations are helpful. Certainly, they can stay between us for now. But give us the feedback. Give me the feedback. Let me know if these are things that are helpful. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you tuning in to these episodes, not only as I share some of my own personal reflections about this journey that we're on, you know, and it won't always be, you know, about me. It'll be about some of the other things I'm thinking about some of the interactions that I've been having. But I hope these conversations are helpful. I hope these interviews that we do at the Disruption Lab are helpful to give you perspective into how other people think about some of these things that many of us go through, inspired by their personal stories, understanding how they're tackling new and challenging things, learning about elements of ecosystems or dynamics of building that maybe you don't get exposed to all the time, and just widening your perspectives and widening your horizons on what's possible. So I hope these things are helpful. I hope you keep tuning in. And I just wanted to say thank you and look forward to chatting with you all the next time.